Science,
engineering,
medicine,
chemistry,
physics,
biology, humanities, cardiology,
computer, public health, global
science communication.
Hello everyone, I'm Gareth Mitchell, and in this edition, what's it like to be signed up to Imperial's COVID-19 vaccine trial? We hear from a participant as the trial gets underway. Also today, we're looking at neurodiversity, and there are words from Imperial's poet-in-residence.
Science and all art does similar things. We really like to look at the world, try to understand it, and then give that back, whether that's a poem or a research paper, a talk, or a piece of spoken word. They're the same impulse, it's just different approaches to understanding, processing, and sharing our worlds with each other.
The Imperial College Podcast.
Right, well, we are going to start with a couple of news stories from around the college. We have Caroline Brogan here. She's going to speak to us in a minute. But first, let's come to you, Maxine Myers. And this is some very interesting innovation involving artificial intelligence, isn't it, in especially ill COVID-19 patients?
Yes, so a major trial is underway at the Royal Brompton Hospital, led by researcher Dr. Bridget Purcell, who has dual role at the college and at the Brompton Hospital. And it's basically looking at whether artificial intelligence can be used to kind of help develop more effective treatments for really ill COVID-19 patients. So at the moment, there are a couple of options. If you have a very serious case of COVID, you can develop a very nasty condition called acute respiratory distress syndrome. So it can be life-threatening, and it's basically the lungs cannot provide the body with enough oxygen, and so you might require mechanical ventilation in intensive care. And the thing is, though, with mechanical ventilation, you have to get the ventilator settings right. So if you overventilate someone, you can actually cause further damage to a patient's lungs. So this new trial is looking at whether AI could help clinicians with this decision.
Yeah, it's called the Beacon Care System, isn't it? So tell me a bit more about the system.
Yeah, so the system, basically, it's connected to a ventilator, and it basically advises staff the best ventilator settings for each patient. So a clinician will put in data on a patient condition, and then the system uses mathematical calculation, and then it's able to recommend ventilator settings that are more suited to an individual's needs rather than a general setting. So it could help if you're getting more personalised treatment, it could help with more effective treatments for that patient.
And of course, this is very timely, isn't it, Maxine?
This trial's underway as we're moving into the winter month. Obviously, winter's a very difficult time for the NHS. So this could really help with clinicians in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic response.
All right, Maxine, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for that. Well, now, how about this for a first? This is research that gets a really close look at what's going on in a racing driver, how they're responding in really extreme conditions out on the racetrack. So this is tracking brain activity and the driver's eye movements and body movements. Lots going on here. Caroline Brogan is going to tell us a bit more about it. This is literally fast-track research, isn't it?
It is fast-track research, Gareth. So researchers in the Department of Bioengineering wanted to know how an expert's brain and body reacts to driving under extreme conditions.
And how did they look into all that?
Well, they equipped Formula E world champion Lucas Di Grassi with an EEG helmet to measure his brainwaves, goggles to track his eye movements, and limb movement sensors while he was driving around the Top Gear track in Surrey.
What did they find?
They found that Lucas Di Grassi kept his eyes on the horizon during straight segments and on the curve tangent while navigating curves. They also found changes in his brainwave activity. So alpha brainwaves were increased and delta brainwaves were decreased.
So they're getting a real insight into the relationship between what somebody's doing, like where they're looking, and how the brainwaves are responding.
Yes, the researchers hope that by studying experts in the wild, so to speak, they can channel that expertise and channel those finely honed instincts into things like driverless cars and how amateur people can drive in the real world.
How can people find out more about this story?
Well, the news story is on the Imperial News website with original footage of Lucas in action with his goggles and his helmet and his movement sensors. So do take a look at that.
That was Caroline Brogan, and you also heard there from Maxine Myers. Well, now, exciting times. Volunteers have been signed up, injections administered, results awaited. Yes, trials of Imperial's COVID-19 vaccine have just started, and we've been hearing from one of the first to volunteer as a trial member. She's Dr. Justine Alford, who just happens to be Communications Manager at the Institute of Global Health Innovation. Now, for the purposes of the research study, she's just taking part as regular Justine, really a member of the public, basically, who just wants to help out. On the day that she received her injection, Justine was participating in another trial of sorts because she was in front of some journalists, including a couple of film crews. Sounds a bit daunting to me. Ryan O'Hare has been hearing how she feels, having now joined the trial.
I have to say that, perhaps this is quite a boring response, but actually I feel very well and I feel very fine. So it's nice to know that, I haven't experienced so far any side effects or any symptoms like that. It was all very seamless. Mentally, I feel really proud and excited to be a very small cog, but in a big machine, and part of this amazing and potentially groundbreaking research.
But your experience may have been slightly more stressful than others because you had not one, but two crews filming you throughout. So how was that? Did it make you more nervous? Or?
I definitely felt more nervous being under the watchful eye of a number of journalists. Obviously, you don't want to be wincing or anything like that or making it seem like you are uncomfortable. So I think, yes, actually, my nerves were a little bit heightened, but the nurses and the doctors were so lovely and were so reassuring that absolutely everything was fine, and I felt really good doing it.
Why did you get involved with it? What made you think, I want to do this vaccine trial in particular?
Well, I have a background in virus research, actually. I worked on HIV. I wasn't doing vaccines or anything like that, but I was one of the, lab rats pipetting tiny things in between tubes and looking down microscopes. But it definitely gave me an appreciation of the importance of medical research, and it's something that I've always wanted to be part of the translation of science, really. And I completely understand that without human trials, then we can't progress medicine. And so they definitely need people to be volunteering. And so I wanted to be one of those people that can hopefully help to advance some really important research.
Fantastic. And today was your first dosage, and you've had a sort of couple of steps before then. Can you talk us through a little bit about the sort of clinical stages so far and what you've got to come?
Yeah, so I had to come in for a screening a couple of weeks ago. So they took a few blood tests and they took a urine test as well to work out if I was pregnant, because you're not allowed to take part in this trial if you are pregnant because it's an experimental treatment. And they did, a standard bit of prodding and poking, checking my breathing, checking my heart, looking at my blood and all things like that, checking my vital signs, seeing how my organs are functioning. And thankfully I had a full bill of health, which meant that I could take part in the trial. So it's very important that people are taking part at the moment who are healthy, because we're trying to work out if the vaccine is safe or not in people. And then yesterday I got my first dose of the vaccine, and it was a very tiny amount of liquid that went in my arm. It didn't hurt or anything like that. So it was actually a very seamless process.
So what's the next step for you? If they told you, you have to come back in, is it 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks? Do you get another dose? What happens next?
Tomorrow I'll get a phone call from the lead researcher, and she's just going to check in with me to see how I'm doing. And then every day I have to fill in a diary. So I've got a little measuring tape with me, and I've been given my own thermometer as well. So I've got to check my temperature. I've got to record whether I have any swelling, where the jab went in, and just note down anything that might be awry, whether I'm not feeling quite right or whether I've got any signs or symptoms that the doctors might want to look into. So I've got to do that every day for the next week. And then I've got to pop back in next week as well. They'll take some more tubes of blood. And then from then on, they're going to start looking at how my body is responding to this vaccine, what my cells are up to in my immune system. And also, again, just repeat health checks just to make sure that everything is okay so they can work out that this vaccine is safe. And then I've got to come in almost every week for the next 2 months, actually. And then in a few weeks' time, I will also actually get a booster jab. So they're giving me a second dose of the vaccine, which sometimes does happen with certain vaccines. So it's not an abnormal thing that they're doing that.
For anyone who's been following the progress of this vaccine, they'll know that this is the first time it's ever been trialled in people, really. We know it's potentially very safe, but how does it feel to be part of an experiment for the first in human study for a brand new vaccine like this?
It really does feel amazingly cool, I have to say. I told all of my friends that I was taking part, and they were all very jealous and wanted to do it as well. Obviously, the part that I'm playing is much smaller than everything that's been going on with all the amazing researchers who have brought us this far. But really, I would just love to find out whether this is a successful vaccine, that I've played a role in something that could potentially be groundbreaking and world-changing. So I'm really excited to be following the progress of this trial.
Well, so are we. That's Justine Alford talking there to Ryan O'Hare. And as Ryan says, we hope to follow Justine's experiences on the clinical trial. Well, not only can you stay across that trial via the Imperial website, but also you can keep up with how Imperial scientists are rapidly responding to the COVID-19 pandemic in our lockdown lessons. You can watch this series of video lessons by going to our Be Inspired website. That's Be Inspired. It's all curated by Sarah Rankin, who's Professor of Leukocyte and Stem Cell Biology in the National Heart and Lung Institute. Not only that, but Sarah has also helped set up a Neurodiversity in Albertopolis network with our companion organisations along Exhibition Road. Hayley Dunning has been speaking to Professor Rankin and first asked how she defines the term neurodiversity.
It's quite a controversial term, I have to say. A lot of people don't like it as a term because from a scientific point of view, it's a bit meaningless. It's like saying biodiversity. So actually, we're all neurodiverse. But it's quite often used by people that are neurodiverse because the other terms are a bit long-winded. So it's used as an umbrella term which describes people that have specific learning disabilities like ADHD, dyspraxia, dyslexia, dyscalculia, or people that are autistic. And so that's all a bit of a mouthful. So neurodiversity is just a sort of catch-all.
So what motivated you to set up this network?
Oh, lots of different things. It's been a bit of a journey, I guess, from initially one of my children being diagnosed as dyslexic, that leading me to sort of then realise that I, had a lot of those characteristics that they exhibited. I went and got myself assessed, realised that I was dyslexic, but actually not massively dyslexic, but very dyspraxic. And I also have characteristics of ADHD. So one of the things about these learning differences or disabilities is that 60% of people that have them have more than one.
How did you overcome those issues? Because you're a professor now.
Basically, so this is another term that I quite like using because I find it's less offensive, basically, is to ask people if they're twice exceptional. And that's an Australian term, and it means somebody that has a learning disability but is also has a high ability or maybe high intellect. And so if you are intelligent and a good problem solver, then you will find strategies. And I think that's the key, is finding your own strategy for learning. And that's what I do. And that's what most people end up having to do, is find out their strategy, how they best learn, how they best work. But I think if you have support, that process is accelerated. My strategy, for example, for revision was actually drawing things out and making them very colourful and doing something quite creative, because I could remember that. And just the process of drawing was quite enjoyable. So it wasn't something that I minded doing.
What was it like finding out a bit later that you had these conditions?
It is very complex because most of the people that you talk to as adults that have had the same experience, because I think there's a whole generation basically of us that were never tested. You've gone through school, you've been called slow, stupid and all those things, so that obviously has an impact on your confidence of your sort of intellectual ability and things. So I think most people have had that experience, and then obviously they've had to find their own way and have been unsupported in terms of their learning and education. And that's why we're trying to change things, I guess, and make sure that they don't have that same experience.
As I noticed that the network you set up is staff and students, so was that part of the motivation for mixing those two?
I think we've got a lot to learn from each other at this stage, and it is about sharing experiences and stories. I think basically we're all adults, so why do we have to make that distinction? For a lot of us that are neurodiverse, one of our strengths is creativity and being innovative and creative. I think it's definitely not something that is restricted to a certain age, and younger people can actually be more creative because they may be freer and things. And I think one of the ideas of this project is to work collaboratively as well. The idea of having all those creative minds, young and old, together, I think is a very positive thing.
You've talked a bit about the issue of neurodiversity in STEM. So why do you think it's particularly important in STEM?
There's data out there that students don't do as well in their terms of STEM GCSEs, and there's a lot of different reasons for that I won't go into, but it means that those people are effectively disadvantaged. And if you think about Imperial, where you need A stars to get a place, then you're not going to get your A stars, so you're not coming to Imperial. And I think that's problematic because clearly there are students that might not get A stars, but they could be very creative and very innovative. A levels GCSEs certainly do not assess that creativity. So you might have somebody that's great at recall and analysis and things, but we need some scientists at least that are really creative and innovative to come up with new solutions and projects, etc.
Sarah Rankin speaking there to Hayley Dunning about neurodiversity and the new network across Albertopolis. Well, finally, a static electricity haiku. Here goes. We brush fingertips and snap, giggling at the pain. Sense there's a spark here. Now, there's more where that came from Imperial poet-in-residence Dan Simpson, who recently penned a whole load of haikus in his Twitter takeover of the Spark channel. He's also been collaborating with Dr. Ons Verkerman of the Centre for Environmental Policy. Hayley has been hearing from Ons and Dan. And first, about Dan's background as a poet.
I've been doing poetry for around 10 years now, I guess sort of professionally and seriously. I started off writing really nerdy stuff about maths and poetry just from a passion and an enjoyment of that subject. And having done that for a few years, I kind of started working in research institutions and scientific places, lots of universities basically, combining that idea of spreading the research and pursuit of science and putting that through poetry to the public.
What will you be doing at Imperial?
We're doing a whole bunch of things with the engagement team. I've just finished crowdsourcing first poem, which we're going to do 3 of across the residency. That was all about nature and sort of coming back to it. And yeah, I'm currently working with Dr. Ons Verkerman on a collaborative piece, kind of using poetry and spoken word, kind of reflecting on, I guess, blue space and mental health at the moment. So that's kind of what we're exploring in a piece that we're writing together.
So Ans, I'll come to you. What does your research look at?
It really ties in really neatly with what Dan was just saying about mental health and blue space, but I'm particularly interested in how people connect with nature. For me, that came out of sort of my own perspective as like, how do we get people to care about nature in order to want to protect it? So I'd come to it from a sort of a biodiversity conservation standpoint. But then it came to understand that it ties in really well with my other background, which is actually in mental health research, and finding that people get these amazing benefits from connecting with nature. So they see the benefits that they get mental health wise. And I started to ask myself, is that maybe a reason why people might want to protect it as well? So through their connection with nature, does it make them want to protect what is still there or improve what is there? And so that's what I'm looking at.
So what was it like working with a poet? Have you ever done anything like that before?
No, I have not. So I don't know. Yeah, it's a little confronting because it's like you have to switch on a different part of your brain, essentially. I mean, you have to really think differently, think outside the box, because you get so used to writing in that very boring, very dry scientific language, and then Dan comes along and he's like looking at the same sorts of issues, but you're having to completely rethink how you sort of engage with it. I thought it was really good. So far, I'm really enjoying it. I was a little apprehensive at the start, but I think it's just been really, really fun, actually. Yeah. I hope Dan feels the same. I don't know if that's true.
I feel the complete opposite. It's been an absolute nightmare. I'm absolutely joking. I love it. I really love working with scientists and researchers. For me, I find that really interesting, that the idea of scientific papers being dry and sort of maybe dull or whatever. And I read scientific papers to research when I'm writing stuff, but there's such interesting turns of phrases and expressions, and you get into the technical language and the sort of jargon of whatever the field is. And it's like this, for me as a poet, it's this rich seam of like incredible inspiration to go and mine. I love how we get very used to our own worlds, I think. When you kind of go and actually step into somebody else's world, it makes new connections in your brain, and I think it opens up your thinking to new ways of writing, new ways of creativity, new ways of exploration. And ultimately, I think science and all art does similar things. We really like to look at the world, try to understand it, and then give that back with our own understanding, whether that's a poem or a research paper, a talk, or a piece of spoken word. They're the same impulse, it's just different approaches to understanding, processing, and sharing our worlds with each other.
Where are we up to with the poem? Could you give us a preview?
We kind of knocked some ideas together. I think we're honing it at the moment, so I think we're working towards a second draft, and that's going to be ready in time for the Back to Nature digital lates that Imperial are running at the end of July, beginning of August. So I got Arns to kind of reflect on her experience of scuba and how it made her feel when she was sort of in the water. And then we associated that with how we've had to sort of slow down in the pandemic as well, and the idea that water forces you to slow down. We've sort of been forced to slow down. So those ideas kind of came together a little bit. There was a phrase Arns actually said in our very first meeting, which I keep coming back to, which she said, the certainty of pressure. And that really, I love that expression, because we are certain to experience pressure in life and in our sort of psychological makeup. That's part of being human. But obviously in water, that word pressure takes on an entirely different meaning. And that association really sparks my poetic brain. So the certainty of pressure. Sometimes we need to slow down. Our planet is steady, rotates at about 1,000 miles per hour, orbits the sun at 67,000, which is, relatively and universally speaking, slow. Here is a constant underneath our feet, a fixed value on which to ground ourselves. The certainty of pressure. Or we immerse. Everything is slower underwater. When I am in water, I am weightless, suspended. On land, on a still day, you cannot feel the air around you, but the ocean hugs you. I can feel it, cooling my skin. Bubbles brush my face, rising up to the surface. Breathing is louder here. Or maybe everything else is quieter. More aware of my own body, my own breathing, I breathe slowly. Every breath feels like a disruption, the certainty of pressure.
It's lovely, very evocative. I felt very calm actually listening to that. So Arns, how does it feel to have your words be poetry?
Yeah, it's fun. I love seeing it reflected in that way. It's really not something that I'd engaged with previously. It makes you a little vulnerable because, you can write boring, dry, so sciencey words and, they go through peer review and that's kind of makes you vulnerable, but this is like next level.
Ons Verkerman and Dan Simpson talking to Hayley Dunning. And Dan mentioned the Imperial Late Online Back to Nature events. You can get involved from Monday to Sunday next week. That's the 27th of July to the 3rd of August. Go to the main Imperial website and click on the Be Inspired link and then go to Lates. You can sign up for free. Oh, and also do check out Dan's Back to Nature, a crowdsourced poem. That's on our YouTube channel. It's absolutely brilliant. Check it out via youtube.com/Imperial College Video. And that brings this podcast to a close, other than to remind you that, of course, we are wherever you go to find your podcast. We're on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, yes, YouTube again, and SoundCloud, and also Entail, so that's visual podcasting. Do check that out if you can. Well, I'm Gareth Mitchell saying thank you very much indeed for listening for now, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.